We knew a few weeks ago that the right conveners in the Labor Party had started to observe how the caucus was behaving, what their mood was, not formally sounding out, if you like, but quietly having conversations with colleagues to find out if they may have shifted. Now, today we have reports that Julia Gillard's closest ministers in cabinet have begun doing the same, and that takes it up one notch. And that would show, of course, just how threatened or cautious she is of her rival, Kevin Rudd, who is undoubtedly circling her for his old job.
Some newspapers are speculating this is all going to come to a head next month. Any word in Canberra there from MPs as to when this may be resolved?
Andrew, Kevin Rudd's backers have long said that this could probably happen after the Queensland election. Now, the momentum and the frenzied nature of this particular leadership, what should we call it, destabilisation, I suppose, is happening at such a pace, Andrew, that you never know, it could happen sooner than that. Now, we saw yesterday the spectacle of Kevin Rudd jumping up on stage at a charity event to dance and sing. He always seems to go just that little bit beyond what's required of a politician, turning up to an event to lend his or her name or support. Now, of course, Kevin Rudd is on that campaign trail in Queensland, most notably helping Kate Jones try and keep her seat of Ashgrove, which has been contested by the would-be Premier Campbell Newman. Now, those close to Kevin Rudd say that this will be an excellent opportunity to remind the federal Labor caucus of one of Kevin Rudd's greatest strengths, and that's his Kevin 07 ability to campaign and to get a lot of media attention, to come across as a folksy kind of a dorky dad politician, when of course many in Labor see him as anything but. Some describe him as a megalomaniac, and other words I really can't repeat on television at this time of the morning, Andrew.
Well, it's interesting speculation, isn't it, as to where, if there is some sort of leadership spill, if Kevin Rudd does make a play, does he do it before the Queensland election?
Well, look, I don't think the Rudd backers want that timeline necessarily. There's only a couple more weeks of Parliament sitting, which is the time you would expect Labor MPs to get together, start worrying, and something happens and it triggers a spill. But, you know, these things never happen to plan, Andrew. If we look at the last leadership spill, it was a report in the Sydney Morning Herald that morning that actually prompted Julia Gillard's hand. And that was a report that Kevin Rudd had asked his Chief of Staff Alastair Jordan to start testing out his backbench to make sure that they were still loyal to him and not his deputy, Julia Gillard. Now, Julia Gillard became so angry, it is reported, and incensed that she confronted Kevin Rudd, and after weeks of being urged to challenge him anyway, that was the trigger that really forced her hand. Now, these things have a way of happening in no way that we can speculate or imagine or anticipate. It often just takes one little thing like that to get the ball rolling, and once that happens, it's game on. But of course, until then, there's so much toxic destabilisation that really does damage the party, and in this case I think damages both Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard. I was with two Labor MPs during the week, and they spent the entire time checking their phones just in case something was happening up at the House. They didn't want to miss it like last time. So I don't think that wasn't entirely a joke either, Andrew, but it does go to show just how jumpy and nervous the atmosphere in Parliament's been these last two sitting weeks.
Well, and how destabilising it is. How can you run government, and I guess this is the opposition's point, how can you run government if you're busy looking over your shoulder?
Well, of course, exactly. That's exactly the attack the opposition has mounted over these past 2 weeks. Although I would say Julia Gillard, as Prime Minister, has managed to get through policy achievements that eluded Kevin Rudd. Now, granted, Julia Gillard has a different makeup of the Parliament. In some ways, that's easier for her to deliver policy. In other ways, it's much harder because it's a minority government. But she's managed to get through the means test on the private healthcare rebate, something that Kevin Rudd had a double dissolution trigger for but didn't use. Liberals. She also managed, of course, to get through what she describes as her carbon tax. Now, that's something also, an emissions trading scheme very similar to Kevin Rudd's that eluded him as well, and he had a double dissolution trigger for that and never used it either. So you could certainly say that on many policy fronts, Prime Minister Julia Gillard is governing, and she is getting on with the job, which is what she says publicly anytime she's asked about Kevin Rudd and his intentions. But of course, this does have to come to a head. This is so toxic for the Labor Party, and it is extremely distracting from their agenda. This was meant to be a year of having gotten some of the harder issues off the table in 2011 and looking forward to a different sort of agenda in 2012. It doesn't look like that's going to happen for Labor this year.